Hello everyone, welcome to the online learning channel. My name is Brad and I'll be assisting you today with English, specifically focusing on the grade 12 curriculum. And when it comes to the grade 12 curriculum, we're going to be looking at the aspect of English that refers to reading and viewing, specifically focusing on poetry and literature. So what I have for you is a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to share that'll just guide us along the way in terms of not only looking at the various aspects of literature that you may come across in your actual examination, but how it is that you can take on those questions that you may be faced with when it comes to literature and, of course, poetry. So for today's purposes, we're going to be focusing, like I said, on literature, specifically looking at the idea of drama. So now when it comes to the aspect of English that makes mention of reading and viewing, remember it can be divided into poetry, a novel, together with a dramatic item. So again, this is going to be an aspect of English that you will come across in English home paper number 2, section A, specifically focusing on poetry, section B, focusing on the novel, whatever novel that may have been that you studied in your particular, say, schooling curriculum. And then with regards to section C, again, a dramatic item, usually of a Shakespearean nature or Shakespearean theme, that again, you prepared for throughout the term and throughout the year. So you need to answer 5 questions in all when it comes to the actual examination itself. 3 questions in section A, 1 in section B, and 1 in section C. So now with regards to section A, remember we made mention of the fact that this is referring to poetry. Section B is referring to the novel, where you need to answer 1 question, and section C, which is going to be the primary focus of today's lesson, is focusing on a dramatic item, which you would also only need to answer 1 question. Remember in section B and C, you do have a variety of choice when it comes to the actual, say, topic or the actual subject that needs to be addressed. So when it comes to answering questions in section B and section C, you have to answer 1 essay question and 1 contextual question in either or. So when it comes to section B, for instance, if you answer the essay-based question, you would then have to answer the contextual-based question in section C, and vice versa. So you need to think long and hard about what you're most familiar with, what you're most comfortable with when it comes to writing an essay or answering contextual questions. So often is the case, learners are a little bit unawares as to how long their pieces need to be when it comes to answering questions. But when it comes to the essay-based question, in the poetry section, it's usually between 250 to 300 words, but in the literature section, you would typically be required to answer, essays up until a length of 400 to 450 words. So this is in the novel and, of course, drama, a dramatic section of your actual examination. So remember, your essays need to be concise, they need to be relevant, and they need to be pretty well structured in the sense that an introduction, a body, and a conclusion needs to be evident, and a nice flow is apparent within your actual essay itself. Just a side tip or side note when it comes to time management, you'll notice that section A, B, and C have all been divided into various, say, time frames. In this particular case, section C, our focus for today, I would suggest that you dedicate up to 55 minutes. So this is a table that just indicates the various themes that could be coming your way in terms of the section A, poetry. Now remember, this is just based on a particular past paper. It's not necessarily what's going to be the case when it comes to your particular piece. The purpose of today is to look back at an old past paper so as to get a sense as to what could be coming your way. Section B, the various novels that you could come across. Of course, only those that you have studied would be most relevant to you. Hopefully 1 or 2 of those would have been the case. And for today's purposes, section C, the dramatic items of a Shakespearean theme that we're going to be focusing on. What you could come across, the idea of Hamlet, the play known as Othello, together with The Crucible. These are all productions that have been written by William Shakespeare, and all pretty consistent themes in English home paper number 2. Okay, so without further ado, let's look at a couple of past exam papers and a series of questions and how it is that you can go about answering those questions. So now when it comes to section C, this is the drama question. For today, we're going to be focusing on Hamlet, written by William Shakespeare. In this particular case, we're going to be looking at the essay question. Okay, now remember, there can be either an essay-based question or a contextual question when it comes to the theme of Hamlet. So in this case, the essay question is starting off with a quote: Hamlet's behavior throughout the play has unintended consequences. Okay, so that's clearly a statement that's being made. So what we need to do is we need to critically discuss the extent to which you agree with the above statement. So your response should take the form of a well-constructed essay, typically between 400 to 450 words, or in simpler terms, 2 to 2.5 pages. Okay, so a couple of responses that I'd like to share with you today. Again, it's also important that you bear in mind that you can take a series of approaches to answering this question. It doesn't necessarily have to be one defined, straightforward approach. So you might argue that this statement is not entirely true, and you may discuss how Hamlet's behavior has either intended or unintended consequences, or you might offer a mixed response. So it's up to you at the end of the day, whatever you feel most comfortable with in terms of offering an answer to the question. Okay, so a couple of points that I'd like to share with you today regarding Hamlet and his so-called unintended consequences. So from the time he learns of his father's murder, Hamlet is obsessed with the idea to avenge his death. This sets him on a course that has many unintended consequences. So clearly, I've taken the stance where these unintended consequences are most certainly evident within Hamlet's life and within the actual production. Hamlet intends for his antic disposition to mislead his enemies and to allow him to investigate the ghost's accusations. So it serves, however, to make Claudius suspicious of him and leads to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's spying on him and ultimately their deaths. Okay, so Hamlet's introspection, self-doubt, and anxiety causes him to procrastinate, thus giving Claudius the opportunity to act out against him. Okay, so just a couple of points that just surmise the actual dynamics between the likes of Hamlet together with his so-called acquaintances. Although Hamlet has the perfect opportunity to kill Claudius while he is at prayer, he decides against it, as he does not want Claudius's soul to ascend to heaven. His delay gives Claudius time to come up with a plan to kill him, realizing that Hamlet now poses a threat to him. So Claudius sends Hamlet to England, where he will inevitably be executed by the king. So he thinks Hamlet's boarding of the pirate ship has the unintended consequence, once again, of enabling him to return to Denmark in order to escape his execution. So Hamlet unintentionally kills Polonius when he realizes that he's being spied upon in his mother's room. As a result, Lartius is determined to avenge his father's death. Okay, so a couple of points being made mention of there. Hamlet's cruel treatment of Ophelia is a result of his disillusionment with his mother and women in general. His brutal rejection of her and her father's death at Hamlet's hands cause Ophelia to descend into a state of madness, and she drowns herself soon thereafter. In order to eliminate the threat that Hamlet poses to him, Claudius poisons Hamlet's wine at the duel. Gertrude's death after drinking the poison is again a consequence that neither Hamlet nor Claudius could have predicted. So these unintended consequences are now being brought to light, if you will. Fortinbras becoming king of Denmark is another unexpected outcome of Hamlet's commitment to revenge. Candidates, therefore, may argue that much of what Hamlet does is orchestrated and that he has a very clear outcome in mind. They might refer to his deliberate act of feigning madness and his plan to stage a play that mirrors Claudius's murderous and incestuous actions. So both these acts have the intended outcome of confirming Claudius's guilt. Okay, so quite a number of points being mentioned there, and essentially gives the reader a sense as to how in-depth the writer is now willing to go. So what does it mean to answer contextual versus essay questions? This is a question that we've asked ourselves time and time again. So now when it comes to tackling a contextual question, it takes on a pretty different dynamic to that of an essay-based question. Okay, so what I have here is an extract from Hamlet itself that just highlights the various dialogues that are taking place between some of the characters, in this case Claudius versus Hamlet versus Claudius versus Gertrude, etc. And it just gives us a sense as to what kind of dynamic is now unfolding in their conversations with one another. Okay, so again, another extract that just highlights the various conversations that are now taking place between the likes of Hamlet and Claudius. Okay, so the first question in a contextual sense is asking us to refer to line number 2. So a little more than kin and less than kind. Okay, so this is the line that we need to make mention of. We need to account for Hamlet's reaction to Claudius's greeting. Okay, so how do we do this essentially? So what we need to establish is the fact that Hamlet is now being disrespectful towards Claudius. He is resentful of Claudius's calling him my son because he feels that Claudius has no right to usurp his father's role, which of course is something that Hamlet is deeply mournful of, the fact that his father has now passed. He disapproves of Claudius's marriage to his mother. He is indignant and tries to distance himself from Claudius's familiarity. Okay, so this is the approach that Hamlet is now taking when he now reacts to Claudius's greeting. Now, if we refer to lines 5 to 10, it makes mention of the fact that good Hamlet casts nature to eternity. So again, many of these quotes may not necessarily make sense at first glance because it's Old English. It's an English, it's a dialect of English that may not be that familiar with the actual, say, reader at first glance. But the more time that you give yourself to analyze and to understand it, the clearer it becomes. So what you need to do is suggest what motivates Gertrude to utter these words in the above lines. So what has motivated him to utter these particular words? So Gertrude displays motherly concern for Hamlet's well-being. She wants him to come to terms with his father's death. She is distressed by the animosity that Hamlet feels towards Claudius. She might also feel guilty for having contributed to his melancholic state of mind with her hasty marriage to Claudius, and she urges him to accept her marriage. She appears to be supportive of Claudius as he attempts to engage Hamlet. So this is clearly a dynamic that Claudius and Gertrude are now trying to manage and trying to make sense of when it comes to attending to Hamlet and his emotions. Okay, so 1.1.3, you need to refer to lines 30 to 32. But to persevere, 'tis unmanly grief. In the light of later events or latter events, comment on whether Claudius is being sincere by making the following statement. So at the end of the day, we both probably are aware that Claudius is insincere. He appears to be concerned and attempts to persuade Hamlet that his behavior, though understandable, is pretty unreasonable in the eyes of Claudius. His words are also patronizing and merely an attempt to win over Hamlet. He also subtly insults Hamlet by referring to his grief as unmanly, and he also sees Hamlet as a threat and uses his words to undermine him. Later, Claudius has Hamlet spied upon and plots his eventual death. So we can clearly see that there's a kind of negative dynamic taking place here between Claudius and Hamlet. Okay, so if we go back to the actual question, we can see that the next one is asking us to refer to line 33. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven. Okay, so we need to discuss the irony in this line in the context of the play. So you'll notice that there are quite significant English dynamics in terms of the language aspect that's now being asked of us here in reference to the literature. So when it comes to this question, Claudius is saying that Hamlet's excessive mourning is against the will of heaven. Okay, in a heavenly or again a Christian-like sense. However, Claudius's murder of his brother and marriage to his brother's wife are far greater sins against heaven than the fact that someone is mourning or overly mourning. The murder violates the divine rights of kings, and the marriage would have been regarded as incestuous, if you will. So it's a little bit close to home, if you will. His immortal plots to murder Hamlet are also incorrect to heaven. The fact that he's now looking to murder someone is not exactly a heavenly act or heavenly, say, way of doing things. Okay, so we move on then to the next extract. As you can see, it involves the likes of Hamlet together with Gertrude, as well as Claudius, and Lucianus is also finding themselves in this particular, say, dynamic. So just to read through this, Hamlet to Gertrude, Madam, how like you this play? Gertrude, the lady protests too much, methinks. Hamlet, oh, but she'll keep her word. Claudius, have you heard the argument? Is there no offence in it? Hamlet, no, they do but jest, poison and jest, no offence, i'th world. Claudius, what do you call the play? Hamlet, the mousetrap. Marry how? Tropically. This play is the image of a murder done in Vienna. Gonzago is the Duke's name. His wife, Baptista. You shall see anon. 'Tis a knavish piece of work, but what that? Your Majesty and we that have free souls, it touches us not. Let the gold wind wince, our withers are unwrung. Enter player Lucianus. Okay, so this is one Lucianus, nephew to the king. Hamlet to Lucianus. Begin, murderer. Pox, leave thy damnable faces and begin. Come, the croaking raven doth bellow for revenge. Player Lucianus, thoughts black, hands apt, drugs fit, and time agreeing. Confederate season, else no creature seeing. Thou mixture rank of midnight weeds collected, with hectares band thrice blasted the rice infected. Thy natural magic and dire property on wholesome life usurp immediately. He pours the poison in the player king's ear. Okay, so this is the dialogue that's now taking place. We move on to the next item. Hamlet, he poisons him, ith garden for his estate. His name's Gonzago. The story is extant and writ in choice Italian. You shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzago's wife. Ophelia now steps into the picture. The king rises. Hamlet, what frightened with false fire? Gertrude then addresses Claudius. How fares my lord? Polonius, give o'er the play. Claudius, give me some light away. So this is Act 3, Scene number 2, as indicated at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Okay, so the contextual questions that you may be faced with, it's asking us to refer to lines 4 to 5. Have you heard? No offense in it. Account for Claudius's question in this particular case. So essentially what Claudius is doing is he's starting to become suspicious of that the play is directed at him, as he suspects that Hamlet is aware that he has murdered King Hamlet. Okay, so he's also concerned that his evil deeds might be exposed. So the next question, discuss the significance of Hamlet's choice of play, the mousetrap. This is line number 9. Remember, the mousetrap is being mentioned in that first column there. So with regards to the mousetrap, the plot of the mousetrap closely resembles King Hamlet's murder. Its title suggests entrapment. Hamlet intends to use the play to trap Claudius into revealing his guilt. Okay, so Hamlet is not prepared to act against Claudius until he has conclusive proof. So that's an approach that Hamlet is now quite intent on taking. His strategy is effective because he summarizes the plot. Claudius's acts in a guilty manner. So again, exposing Claudius for the actions that he is undoubtedly willing to take. Okay, so question 1.1.7. So now if we refer to lines 17 to 20, this is now making mention of Lucianus. Begin, murderer, bellow for revenge. Okay, so again, when it comes to these types of contextual questions, it may be the case where the examiner is now asking us to put ourselves in the shoes of the characters or those that are now evident within the various pieces. So in this case, it's asking us, if you were the director of a production of Hamlet, how would you instruct the actor to deliver these lines? Okay, so how would you, as the director of this particular piece, instruct the actors to deliver these lines? What kind of emotions would you want the actors to now display, or what kind of aspects of the literature would you want them to emphasize? Because as we can see in the various dialogues, there's a pretty straightforward dialogue taking place, but it's not necessarily that easy to pick up on the tone or the register, if you will, of the various characters, which often is necessary to understand in a kind of real life scenario. So if one is to truly appreciate these Shakespearean pieces, often is the case that you would need to witness them for yourselves on a production stage, so as to make sense of the dialogue that's now taking place between the likes, for instance, of Hamlet and Claudius, and etc. So although it may be possible to imagine the dynamics and the tone to which these characters are now interacting with one another, courtesy of your own imagination, it is ideal if we can, of course, watch any particular items that are now being acted upon in light of the dialogue. Okay, so pay specific attention to body language and tone. Okay, so the body language, this is something that, of course, would be most evident in an actual play production, witnessed live, and the actual tone, the actual kind of register that the various actors make use of, or the various characters make use of in terms of just getting their messages across to one another. And it's important that you motivate your instructions in this particular case. Okay, so with regards to this particular question, there are a couple of approaches that you can take. So again, you are the director and you need to establish how it is that you would like the actors to now play out these roles. So Hamlet might clap his hands and rap on his chair or stand up and gesture to indicate to Lucianus to begin without any further delay. So almost giving us the sense that there is some kind of initiative that needs to take place in order for this dialogue to unfold. His tone might be impatient because he's clearly becoming a bit frustrated, somewhat demanding, as he's eager for the play to begin, and his suspicions about Claudius are yet to be confirmed. So he wants the play to unfold. He wants the actors to now play out the various performances so as to get a sense as to whether Claudius is in fact responding to those actions now being taken by the actual characters. So he is excited as he is sure that Claudius will reveal his guilt. So this is a plot of sorts that Hamlet has now devised, and he's now looking to expose Claudius, if you will, and he's now looking to provide a platform in which not him necessarily, but others do his dirty work, if you will. He's quite intent on trying to reveal whether or not Claudius is guilty. So even though he is quite convinced that Claudius is guilty, he would like some kind of proof to work with. So he may accept valid alternative response. You may accept valid alternative responses. Now, when I say you, I mean the examiner themselves. They may accept any kind of alternative responses to this. The candidate should also respond in a convincing manner, utilizing the context of the discussions that are taking place. And if you are to achieve all 3 marks, you would then have to refer to the body language and the tone that the various actors would be making use of in order to, of course, justify your answer and justify your reason. Because again, it specifically mentioned this in the question. You need to justify your response as to why it is, or you need to motivate your instructions rather in terms of how it is that you foresee these actors carrying out their roles. Okay, excuse me, sorry about that. Going on to question 1.8. So now, when it comes to question 1.8, Hamlet resorts to deception to serve his own interests. Okay, so clearly Hamlet is a man that is intent on achieving some form of clarity as to how exactly his peers behave and operate within his particular presence. So he's now using means of deception, according to this statement, to now serve his own interests, especially along the lines of revenge. So now, do you agree with this statement? And please do justify your response. So this is a contextual question. I remember this is not necessarily an essay-based question, but it is quite similar in the sense that it's a statement that's been offered to us, and now we are expected to respond. So now when we are asked to answer the question, whether or not we agree with the statement, and to justify one's response, we could offer the following. So in this case, I have agreed with the statement. I feel that Hamlet has, in fact, made use of means or methods of deception to now serve his own personal interests. We can clearly see this is quite evident throughout the various extracts that we've made mention of. Act 3, for instance, scene number 2, where the dialogue is taking place between the various characters. So the first point that I've highlighted here is that Hamlet's deception might be considered to be motivated by self-interest. So we've clearly started off the answer by specifically referring to the question, as he has been denied his rightful position as king. So again, clearly Hamlet is a power-hungry individual that wants to ascend to the throne, but ultimately, due to a series of incidences and a series of outcomes that haven't exactly gone his way, he feels that he needs to now make use of alternative means to ascend to the throne. his intense hatred of Claudius provokes him to seek retribution. So clearly Claudius is not Hamlet's biggest, or Claudius is not Hamlet's favorite character, if you will. Hamlet is not very fond of him, and he often tries to manipulate circumstances surrounding Claudius in order to seek out retribution, along the lines again of his father's death and the fact that he's now seeking out revenge. So he feels betrayed by Gertrude's marriage, and his feigned madness is a means of hurting her. Okay, so obviously Gertrude doesn't necessarily want to see Hamlet suffer. They obviously have a deep-founded connection that typically defines their relationship, and the fact that Hamlet is now, experiencing this kind of madness and this kind of depressive-like state, or this manic-like state where his world almost feels like it's crumbling around him. She is quite upset about that naturally, but at the same time, she marries Claudius, and that doesn't necessarily sit well with him either, due to his estranged relationship with Claudius himself. So initially, his deception of Ophelia is part of his plan to maintain the facade of madness. Okay, so clearly he's putting it on. He's not necessarily truly experiencing true manic-like symptoms. He's actually now putting on a bit of an act so as to now gain reaction from those that he's now trying to manipulate. And indeed, Ophelia is one of those individuals. Also, at the end of the day, Hamlet, you could argue, does feel betrayed when he realizes that he has become an instrument of Claudius's machinations, and his cruel rejection of her is purely selfish. Okay, so the fact is that even though he's attempting to now make use of deception in order to get what he wants, at the end of the day, Claudius does realize this and does, step in and try and alter this particular course that Hamlet's trying to take. And again, it's just infuriating the man even further, and it's just highlighting his selfish needs and his selfish desires at the end of the day. Okay, you could, of course, then disagree at the same time. It's not necessarily to say that you do agree. I just felt that I agreed with this particular notion, but just to give you the broader picture, if you do disagree, although Hamlet is desperate to avenge his father's murder and use deception to confirm his suspicions of Claudius's guilt, his reasons for doing so are more altruistic than selfish. Okay, so clearly that's being highlighted there when it comes to disagreeing. Hamlet is motivated by his concern that Denmark has become rotten under Claudius's reign, and he's determined to restore his father's legacy, clearly a positive legacy that his father left on the nation of Denmark. He is concerned about the salvation of his father's eternal soul, as his father died without receiving any form of absolution. So that's something that's really, affecting Hamlet quite significantly, the fact that his father has now died without receiving any form of absolution. Okay, so what candidates may do, that's you, of course. You may make reference to other examples. It's more than okay to offer your own examples and your own, say, alternative or mixed responses that now highlight this particular question and offer any form of response. Essentially, what you will be awarded is 4 marks for any 3 ideas that are well discussed and any 4 distinct ideas that are elaborated on and essentially justified at the end of the day. Okay, so what we've done then for today, we've highlighted section C as a specific focus. We've looked at the drama section. In particular, we have highlighted Hamlet by William Shakespeare as the piece that we have now dissected, if you will. We've looked at a couple of questions that could be evident in an exam paper. In this case, it was a past paper. Looked at the essential dynamics that are evident within the essay-based question, together with the contextual-based question. And we've just, again, dissected the questions, and we've offered a couple of responses that will just hopefully assist you guys along the way in tackling this particular theme, if you do, of course, decide to do so. All right, so thank you once again for tuning in to the online learning channel. I hope you have enjoyed today's lesson focusing on literature, in particular Hamlet. If you did enjoy the video, please do click the like and subscribe to the channel itself, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.